The origin of Western philosophy. Now today, if you think of a poet, you'd probably think of someone standing in front of a microphone, perhaps smoking a cigarette, rhyming in various ways. But if we go back to ancient Greece, the poets are rather different. Not that they didn't rhyme, but they had a very different place in society. In early Greek culture, the poets occupied a central place. And again, today when we think about poets, we generally think about people, creating rhymes and so forth. We don't think of them as developing and presenting history, science, and religion, or dealing directly with cosmological matters, such as the origin, structure, and nature of the universe. But that is what the Greek poets did. Now, it was believed, at least by some, that they were inspired by the famous muses, an expression we still use today, although in general we don't believe there's a supernatural being behind inspiration, specifically the muses, but we still use that term. The poets also provided ethical guides to life, to their tales of heroes, gods, success, and failure. Speaking of the Greek gods, and people are often familiar with them through, of course, mythology, but also through various movies that have come out over the years, some recently, involving the Greek gods. The gods, of course, were presented in the myths and tales of the poets, and the poets presented them in human terms. The gods of the ancient Greeks were very similar to us. They had human flaws, anger, lust, drunkenness, etc. So pretty much every flaw that we had, they had, typically to extremes. And each god, in general, had a particular domain. The classics, of course, being that Zeus, the master of the lightning in the sky. And then, of course, you have the god of the sea, god of the underworld, goddess of the moon, the god of the sun, god of war, and each major god had their own particular area of dominion. Now, perhaps the most famous of the Greek poets, who probably didn't exist, was our good dead friend Homer. He is said to have lived in the 8th century BC, and the works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, are attributed to him. Although, again, there's some belief, rather strong belief, that there was no individual named Homer, and these stories, were passed down and then attributed to this guy, Homer. Now, in the Greek poets of this time, they sort of laid the foundation for philosophy in the following ways. First, they had this concept of a natural order, and this was the order of nature due to the actions and goals of the gods. And so, for example, the god of the sea would control the waves, Zeus would control the storms and the lightning, and then, of course, the god of the sun would control the rising of the sun and setting of the sun. And the gods also provided the chaos, because, as mentioned, they had all our flaws taken to an extreme, and so the disorder of nature was due to the impulses and flaws of the gods. So Zeus may grow angry and throw lightning bolts, or the god of the sea may grow angry and cause a tidal wave or tsunami. Now, unlike the god of monotheism, standard, god of Christianity, Islam, etc., the Greek gods were not omnipotent. They weren't all-powerful. They had clear limits. Also, they weren't omniscient. They were not all-knowing. Things were hidden even from the gods. And they weren't definitely not all good, although some were presented as fairly benign, and they would have their favorite mortals. In many ways, they were quite a bit worse than humans. Now, behind the gods, and above them perhaps, were the fates, and they were the ultimate force in the universe. But in all the stories, they are mysterious and seemingly random. Now, what about ethics? Kind of a core part of philosophy. The classic virtues of the classic poems were those of warriors. So, virtue was defined in terms of excellence, success, power, honor, wealth. Also, moderation, and, of course, security. And honor was one of the key virtues. And much of the work in ethical theory done by our good dead friends Plato and Aristotle involved sort of transitioning from those individual warrior virtues, especially like success and power and honor and wealth, to what we consider now more of the modern virtues. Well, not really modern today, but ones we consider to be core virtues. Things like, well, of course, moderation's there, but generosity, justice, and so on. Now, the gods, of course, were very concerned with honor and status, and would often, cause great trouble and conflict for slights perceived against their honor and status, either by other gods or by mortals. The gods, like us humans, were primarily motivated in these classic tales by flattery and bribery, sacrifices and praise, as opposed to being motivated by moral virtues. People would tend to serve these gods not because, the gods were good and people should, follow them because of their goodness and virtue, but out of very pragmatic reasons. For the same reasons one might obey an authoritarian and dangerous leader, namely out of fear. Or if you have a capricious leader who, hands out rewards to those they like and punishes those they dislike, following them out of self-interest. Now, occasionally Zeus, the top god, was sometimes presented as being concerned with justice, and the poet Hesiod presented him as judging actions, sometimes based on a principle of justice. And so this laid kind of the foundation of morality as an important factor, later built on by philosophers. Now, the Greek poets had 4 concepts of order. First, some events are caused by purposeful agents, us humans, the gods, and other such beings. And today, of course, we obviously still have this view. We do believe, of course, that humans are purposeful and we do stuff. And people who are religious believe that God or their gods cause things to happen. Secondly, some events are random and lack purpose. Stuff just happens. And we still have that view today, that there's randomness and chance. And one of the core debates in metaphysics is between the notion of purpose in the world, which is referred to as teleology, and randomness and chance. Thirdly, of course, we have the fates, and according to the ancient Greeks, all things are subject to the fates. One way to look at them, I guess in somewhat modern terms, we could look at them as like the rules of the universe. Although the Greeks didn't really look at them in that way, they had them, of course, as the fates, and we still use that term today talking about fate or destiny. Lastly, the gods, as noted above, sometimes act and judge on the basis of objective moral principles. So the poets laid the foundations upon which philosophy could develop. So where did Greek science and philosophy really get going? Well, the struggle, the tension between those 4 concepts, namely the idea that there's purposeful agents, random events, immoral fates, and the gods, led to people thinking about how to resolve those conflicts. And so we start seeing the development of this notion of laws of nature, which, of course, get developed into the laws of nature that we talk about today in the sciences. And the occasional concern with morality on the part of the gods put down the foundation for the notion of objective morality, which is later developed by our good dead friends Plato and Aristotle.